No role plays, no conference calls, no BS. Chris and Lorenzo share 4 decades of combined experience to help you become a more effective leader. This is Hacking Your Leadership.
Hey everyone, this is Chris from Hacking Your Leadership, and on today's guest interview, we're joined by Jill Katz. She's the founder of Assemble HR, a growing human resources consulting firm specializing in culture, change, communication, and conflict. Welcome, Jill. Say hi to our audience.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning. Nice to see you and glad to be with you, Chris.
It's a pleasure having you on the show. I want to start by asking you, what does a company that specializes in culture, change, communication, and conflict do?
We build relationships, we build trust quickly, and we have 4 main services that we offer to our clients. We do breakthrough leadership offsites, we do learning programs, we do fractional HR work, and we do coaching.
When I think of the concept of culture, change, communication, and conflict, they're broad and they can be applied to a lot of different areas. If you think about kind of what the cultural zeitgeist is in the moment, when I hear culture, change, communication, and conflict, I hear, okay, we're talking about the debate between in-office, work from home, hybrid. If I put the same 4 words to whatever is going on in the moment 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I'm thinking diversity, equity, and inclusion. What are other kind of broader topics that are affecting a lot of people? Could you apply those things to? Like, what are the things that you've seen over the years when a company is having issues and wants to help, with change management and culture and communication and conflict? What are some of the broader things companies have dealt with over the years?
Absolutely everything. And that's exactly why we work in change, communication, conflict, and culture. And so we believe that those 4 components are the components that touch the lives of every team that is awake and working today in today's world and has been for the past, 100 years. You don't have a team if those 4 things aren't happening every day. So it touches accountability, it touches trust, it touches results, it touches productivity, it touches the way that people build relationships. And then whatever's happening, quite frankly, it touches an organization when there are things happening politically in the world. If you think about what we've all gone through Q4 of this past year, a lot of things were happening that were important there. And in a lot of ways, I think that also touches DEIB. But it can be the hot topics like the hybrid work, and it can also be as important as the way that teams function and interact with one another.
I'm going to ask you kind of a little bit of a loaded question here. Make an argument for why working in the office is important. And then I'm going to ask you to make another argument for why working from home is important.
If you want to engage and retain your top talent, the most important thing you can do for your people is empower them. And the way that you empower employees is to give them the opportunity to make as many choices for themselves in their world of work as possible. Your best bet is not telling people what they should do. They're grown-ups. What people should do is get their work done and be highly productive and highly collaborative. And if they're capable of doing that in an office or remotely, that's what they should do. The relationship building in person is really hard to match any other way. The checking in on people, all of that stuff, I think is complete BS. It is useless. It causes anger. It causes resentment. It's what you do when you're in 3rd grade, when they take attendance. There's no benefit to that whatsoever.
I think a lot of leaders want to do what's right by their people. They also want to do what's right by their business, and they're struggling to figure out what that is. So this idea of putting more power into the hands of the employees is a good thing. Some of the employees want to be in the office, maybe not every day, but at least on a scheduled periodic basis, because they feel like they get more done that way. It's tough to put power in the hands of the employees and also say each employee can do whatever's right for them, right?
I really believe that giving people more ability to make decisions gives people more ability to show up and be accountable, and impress you. And that's where you see your best talent float to the top. When you say to people, show us your best, do your best, that's where you see people step up and impress you. And I think you made such a good point, which is you do see some people saying, I want to be in the office. I prefer to be in the office, or we have the opportunity to go in X days a week and I choose to go. But there is a real emotional piece to it's a power to say, I choose to go versus I'm forced to go. And I think it is so critical to not miss the conversation about how the return to office conversation has disproportionately impacted women, working women, particularly women that are taking care of children or men that are taking care of children. That has been a massive shift in the workforce, and you've lost a lot of women who were unable to go back into the workforce that could be significant leaders in organizations today. So it's being in your car and wasting time. It's all the extra time in your calendar, but then there's an entire conversation about people that have childcare, elder care, pet care, medical issues, and can be amazing parts of teams from their home office. And so I just think that it is really important for us to remember that there is an ability for many, not all, but many people to be highly productive contributors to their organizations in lots and lots of different ways. People travel and they're highly productive when they're traveling. There's no difference from being in a hotel room. I work with lots of clients that are traveling all over the world. That's considered in office. When they're calling in from Mexico and there's spotty Wi-Fi, no one's questioning if they're hybrid at that moment because they're traveling for business. It is a really, really interesting topic, and I wonder if it'll ever get wrestled to the ground, or if we will be talking about this for years and years.
We will be talking about it for years and years. There's no way around it. I think a lot of what drives the arguments and the conversation in whatever direction it's going is just simply where the power lies in terms of the job market, right? So if unemployment is incredibly low and companies are struggling to find talent, the employees have more power, and the likelihood that an organization will be open to whatever working model works for each employee is significantly higher. And if you have 6% unemployment, and if you have, if it was a situation like 2008, 2009, there are people who would volunteer to commute 2 hours a day every single day just because they needed a job. Good luck getting employers to even, consider a working model that works for the employee, whatever that happens to be. So, there almost needs to be a meeting in the middle, a symbiotic relationship that says that, hey, there is no we need you more than you need us. It's we both need each other. Like, people need jobs and companies need talent. And I think that an imbalance of that power can lead to making the wrong decisions. Like if the power balance is too far in one direction or the other, it's really difficult to not wield that in a negative way as a workforce as a whole. It's easy for a person to not, but it's really difficult to. You just see it happening. You see the decisions being made. It's like when unemployment is really high, then you see applicants always saying, "Oh, this organization ghosted me. They stopped replying to my emails. I followed up on interviews. No one's following up," and then they get mad, and then all of a sudden the power switches back to the employees or the applicants, and then they start ghosting companies. And they're like, "Well, they did that to us, 5 years ago when it was the other directions." At some point, people need to just start treating other people correctly with kindness and compassion, because that's just the right thing to do, and just trusting that things will work well if you just do that long enough, as opposed to just kind of like, I want I want my piece of cake too. Now that I see that you got yours a few years back.
I don't think that your listeners can see this right now, Chris, but I'm hearting you and hearting you and hearting you.
I appreciate that. No, we're not recording video, but I saw that in the video chat. So I've noticed an unfortunate decline in the conversations related to diversity, equity, and inclusion over the last maybe year. I think that the murder of George Floyd 4 years ago took it from the back burner or no burner in a lot of organizations to the most important thing in the world for them. But it seems to have lost some momentum recently. I'm wondering if you have any ideas as to why you think that is, or if you're seeing anything from organizations coming to you to say we need help with this, because I feel like we had some momentum and we've lost it.
I think you're right. I think that there has been some change in momentum. There's been a little bit of conversation lately that DEI is dying. There was an article recently about the fact that DEI could be dangerous for organizations. I think that post George Floyd, there was a big sort of burst and focus on the topic. We're really fortunate in my organization. We have a head of DE&I, Zamina Ladak, who is pretty well known. You may know her, and she is one of the best in the business. And I wish she was here for this question, because I learn from her every day, and I do not in any way claim to be an expert on the topic. From my perspective, I think that people have become afraid. I think that the topics around DE&I, particularly post October 7th, have become so sensitive that inside of organizations, leaders are afraid. We are afraid of saying the wrong thing. We're afraid of not saying enough. We're afraid of saying too much. There's just so much fear. We're afraid that what we're sharing in terms of learning is insufficient, or that investing in it and having the training go awry is dangerous. And so I think that much of what is happening surrounding the topic of DEIB has been defined lately as shrouded in fear. And so sadly, just kind of letting it go and letting it be quiet seems to some people like a safer choice.
I think you're right. I at the beginning of my career, it was just diversity. And then I remember when the I was added, diversity and inclusion, in terms of how people felt included, not just that the number was represented on a spreadsheet. And then I remember when the E was added, when equity was added, and now we're talking about belonging. It seems like in a lot of organizations, in an effort to kind of separate themselves and to say that, oh, when we say diversity and inclusion, don't roll your eyes. We mean it differently because we're talking about equity too. When you say DE&I, don't roll your eyes at us. We mean belonging too. They're growing the letters in order to say, hey, we're on the forefront of the vernacular, but the practices that they're doing aren't really changing much. It's just really about how do we keep our head above water here and not do the wrong thing. And it's unfortunate because all that does is it leads to the growing of the letters without the growing of the outcomes you're looking for, right?
It is a very, very sensitive topic. I had a client reach out to me recently because they are looking at whether or not it makes sense to start an ERG for Jewish employees in their organization post October 7th.
Right.
And they asked me to do an amount of research for them to see how many other organizations have such an ERG. And it's an interesting question because it's interesting to understand how many organizations have an ERG for Jewish employees. That in and of itself is an interesting conversation, but it's also interesting that an organization would need or want to know that information before starting an ERG for a group of employees.
I love it. I love that. Yes. Keep going.
I mean, that in and of itself is a conversation.
Yes.
And so we're literally scared of our own shadow at any given time. And we don't want to just do what, once again, it sort of returns us to our earlier part of the conversation, Chris, which is empowering our employees and saying to them, you're grown-ups, and what you want to do, obviously well within reason, is the right thing for you. And if there's an affinity group that you want to create because there are things that are important to you, go for it.
Yeah. People have an inherent desire to feel like they are part of a group that is bigger than them, that they can find commonality with. And when there is a lack of visible commonality, people will look for other things that they can find in common with people. And I think in a lot of cases, some of the strongest relationships that are not based on the outward appearance of somebody, you have to dig to find commonality with some people. But in the times when you do that, oftentimes those end up being the deepest and most profound relationships because they're rooted in something other than what you happen to be born like or with, or these immutable characteristics that you really have no control over. Those are more superficial, but they're easier to form because they're easy to kind of look around a room and say, okay, that person looks like me. Let's go talk to them. Especially if you're looking around the room and there are very few people who look like you, then it can be very easy to do that. I think it's incumbent upon leaders to put their people in situations where they have to work at it, because that's a muscle that has to be flexed and exercised. Otherwise you lose it. It's not something you just inherently have, but the need to feel like you're a part of something bigger will drive you to work that muscle if you don't look around the room and inherently see people that, like, the easy way out is to find the people that look like you. And so if you can't do that, you will work at it. And then that leads to, I think, better outcomes. I don't know why more leaders don't do that. It's so much easier to kind of let the chips fall where they may.
It takes a lot of confidence to do that, and a lot of releasing of the fear of what could go wrong. And I think that watching so many people be canceled, this whole cancel culture has given people a decent amount of valid excuses to not put themselves out there, to just let things chill out and not make a big deal of things and not go into the hard conversations because they don't want to get canceled. They don't want to see people around them get canceled. And so I think we've seen some really important topics not be brought up.
I think for leaders, if you are making decisions that are rooted in values every day, and I mean little decisions, if your people can see you making those decisions daily, and they can look at those decisions and think, okay, I know where my boss, I know where my direct leaders' values are and what they are, then you get a lot of grace when it can't necessarily be obviously tied to whatever that why a decision was made. You get leaders who will make a decision and the person will go, I don't know why they made that decision, but I know the last 100 that I saw them make were rooted in values, and they're values that I agree with, and I like that. So I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt until I find out what the reason was, and I'm going to ask, because it's still important to ask. And then oftentimes, because there's 100 examples of good decision making, the explanation of why the decision was made will let that person go, okay, I get it now. And when a leader is making decisions that I don't want to say that aren't necessarily agreeable with you, but rooted in a consistent set of values, even when you disagree with the decision, that is more important than just making decisions that you agree with. It's making decisions that you can say, I know where this decision came from, and it's the same set of values that the last 10 were made from. So you become a predictable leader. You become someone who, I know the next thing that happens, I know how they're going to act in advance because this is what they did the last 10 times. And I know I'm not going to like what they're going to do. But you know what? I'm okay with that because I know where they're coming from and I know why they're going to do it. And it might not work well for me at this moment, but I like the times where it does work well for me. And that actually becomes more important than just a leader who makes decisions you happen to agree with every time.
I agree.
So I recently had one of the executives from the Gallup organization on the podcast, Jim Harder, and he said that one of the most, maybe the most indicative element of whether or not an employee is engaged, where an employee would self-report as being engaged in their work, is the frequency and rhythm of one-on-one, well-done one-on-one conversations between them and their direct leader. I don't know that that would have been the answer 15 years ago as the single biggest thing, but it has become that. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that people, individual people, have put such a growing value on the individual time, the one-on-one rhythm, the scheduled, like not just quarterly or once a year, but whatever works for them, be it weekly or biweekly or whatever it is? Why has that become so important?
In our business at Assemble, we show up to our offsites and our learning programs wearing shirts that say it's all about relationships. That's our mantra in our company. And I think that's the answer to your question. It's what we believe, and it's the foundation of all the work that we do in our company. I think that your one-on-one meetings are where you develop and nurture the one-on-one meaningful relationship, and the more time you spend building it, and particularly if it's consistent, as you said, whether it's weekly or bi-weekly or monthly, and you know you can count on it, it starts to develop into a rhythm. You start to actually build trust. You start to know you can count on someone. As you said before, in what you were talking about, you start to know what you're going to get from that person. And that one-on-one relationship is what it's all about. It builds loyalty. It's where you start to see more retention. It's where someone starts to be more and more accountable to one another. It's where care is built. And ultimately, you really start to trust that person. So that is hands down. I completely understand where Harder gave you that answer.
There's this element of feedback that I think with a lack of one-on-ones that are regularly scheduled. And I mean, in most organizations, they are regularly scheduled. They're just not often enough, right? They're quarterly or monthly as opposed to more often than that. And in the absence of those, the interactions tend to be about providing feedback to people. And it's just the nature of the beast is that feedback that is not scheduled is there for a reason. It came up because something happened, and then now a person needs feedback. And we just don't do that as often for positive things. We don't do that as often for someone did something well. And so what happens is there's the feedback gets stuck with this negative connotation because it deserves it. It deserves that negative connotation because the last 10 times an employee got feedback from their direct boss, it was because they needed to change something. And it doesn't, I'm not talking about like work ending or, like I'm worried about getting fired type of things. It could be tiny little things just to get feedback on. But if it is critiquing feedback, something needs to change, and they're all like that, or the vast majority is like that, it leads to a general aversion to feedback, not wanting to receive it because that's what it's going to be or likely to be. And when you have regular one-on-ones scheduled, then there's this almost permission to have a time schedule where if I have this time scheduled now, I have nothing to critique this person on, but I have this time, let's find out what they're doing right. Let's give them some good feedback on what they're doing right. You do that often enough, and you decouple the idea of feedback and critiquing, and it becomes feedback is just feedback, and sometimes it's critiquing and sometimes it's not. And when employees believe that about feedback, they're more likely to give it and give it well, and they're more likely to receive it well. When people say nobody likes getting feedback, it's like, no, that's not true. No one likes getting feedback when they know it's going to be negative. That's all. So I think that's a big part of it, but it takes so much intentional work. And I don't mean hard work. I mean consistent work. It's not hard. It's just hard to prioritize it for a lot of people if they're not getting the support from their own boss to make that a priority too. So it really starts at the top. You can't have leaders at the top saying this isn't important, or at least not putting importance on it, and then expect the people below them will place a a higher level of importance on it.
I agree with you.
In organizations where you have seen a lack of psychological safety, how have you addressed that? Because you do assessments in advance, you know what you're getting yourself into when you meet with teams. Obviously, I'm sure you've seen teams that have higher levels of psychological safety than others. What are some of the things that you're saying to leaders if you don't see evidence of high psychological safety amongst a team?
We've got specific programs that we put leaders through, and we put executive teams through to help work through lots of these issues. So we've got programs to help people understand one another's strengths and appreciate one another better. We've got programs to help people understand their change profiles. We have programs on conflict, but where there's issues of psychological safety, it's really important to work with the leaders directly one-on-one and help them understand what it is about their own style that's creating a situation and an environment that's unsafe. And so that's a really individualized response.
Can I get an example? Like what? You don't have to give me a name of a company, obviously, but something that you, if a leader has come to you, obviously they have a desire to at least something to be different. Otherwise, they wouldn't have reached out to your organization to begin with. And if they're reaching out, at least it shows a desire for things to be different, which is a good starting place. And if you find that there's low psychological safety, what are some of the things you tell leaders to do to be able to change that? If they genuinely want to make a change, what can they do?
We work with teams to help them build trust with people on the team. And so the best way to help in situations where there is a lack of safety is to encourage and facilitate really difficult conversations, and to help a leader to be open to hearing what they need to hear, and to help a member of the team figure out a best way to say what they need to say. And so facilitating those really hard conversations is part of what we do. And depending on what the situation is, sometimes multiple people are involved and multiple people feel the environmental strain. And sometimes it's individual, just between a dyad or a triad. And so we figure that out. And sometimes it's in a breakout scenario, sometimes it's a full room, and we facilitate those conversations.
But you're talking about like role play, not role plays specifically, but doing this when it isn't about a specific issue that's actually happening? Or are you talking about actually working through a real world thing with leaders and employees in the moment, like where you're in the room with them?
100%. So recently I was working with a team, and a very, very difficult topic came up, and the team was having a difficult time admitting something to the leader in the room. And I stopped in the room and I said, let's all stop right now and recognize what's happening. It sounds like it's really difficult for you to say to this leader what you need to say. Is that true? And the person said yes. And I said, can you tell us why? And the person said, well, and the person felt very nervous. We don't really give negative feedback to the leader. And I said, well, let's all just press pause and talk about it. And so we opened up a conversation with the CEO in the room and the entire team, and talked about why we don't want to give difficult feedback to the CEO, what the issue is. And I said to the CEO, are you hearing this? What's your feedback to this? How does it feel to you to hear the team saying that it's hard to give feedback to you? What is your response? How do you feel about that? And I facilitated a live in the moment conversation about why it's hard for that team to share feedback with the CEO. And I facilitated a conversation for the CEO to respond back about how that person does or doesn't want to hear feedback from the team.
Do you think the majority of times when situations like that happen, the person is aware but was putting their head in the sand, or unaware and shocked and really, I need to change this now. I didn't realize this was the case. What is it? Where do you think it kind of falls more?
I think it's case by case. I've seen both. Sometimes I see somebody say, I know I've heard this before and I'm working on it and I don't want people to feel this way. And other times I see a deer in the headlights and a person responds and says, oh my gosh, I'm so surprised that you feel that way.
It's interesting. is one of those reactions or scenarios easier to fix than the other?
I think what makes something easiest to address is when a person is interested in being better. It's less about whether or not the person knew it before and more about how a person receives feedback and whether they care enough to want to be better.
Have you been fortunate enough to work with people who mostly do that? You know, I mean, have you ever said to a leader flat out, you hired us to work with you. Things need to change on your end, or the results you're expecting out of us to help you aren't going to happen. This actually needs to change from your end, and have them kind of, you know, you come up with roadblocks where they're just unwilling to change.
Rarely, because the teams that hire us and bring us in want to be better. So we don't come up against a lot of people that don't want to be better. They're bringing in a company like Assemble because it's important to them to elevate their leadership game. So they're rolling up their sleeves and they're digging in, and they know that they're going to have some hard conversations, and we tell them in advance what we're going to do and what their experiences are going to be like. We coach them, we do fractional work, we do a bunch of other things, but in our offsites, people are going into these sessions knowing that they're going to be having really important, meaningful, transformational discussions.
I love that. I think it's very, very important work. Give our listeners an ask. Where can they go to learn more about your company and what you do, in case, you know, this work sounds like something that they would like to be more part of?
We can be found on the wonderful World Wide Web at www.hrassemble. And you can find me on LinkedIn at Jill Katz.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Jill. I appreciate it. I think our listeners will get a lot out of the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. So glad to be here with you today.